So after the BBC released a documentary entitled Hunting the Rolex Rippers, I'll leave a link in the video description below if you haven't seen it, I felt an urgent need to reply and have my say and to tell you why I was so disappointed with it and how the BBC used me to get exactly what they felt they needed and used my experience to produce, unfortunately, something that I felt was nothing much more than a fictional drama rather than a real-world documentary that could genuinely have helped expose and resolve the real-world watch crime problem. I think you're going to find this one very interesting. And joining me today to discuss the show is someone else who watched it with great interest. That's my good friend Ricky from the world-renowned podcast Scottish Watches. Good afternoon, Ricky. How you doing, mate?
I'm doing all right, Paul. Good to be on the show with you. It's a bit of a strange one. This is a collaboration where I'm going to be taking the audio section of what we're about to do here and put it on the Scottish Watches podcast as an episode, and you're taking the video content and putting it on your YouTube channel. So it's like a good Christmas collab where like the characters from different TV series join together.
Yeah,
so,
Laurel and Hardy. Yeah. Some people might say Laurel and Hardy.
Something like that, Penn and Teller, something like that. But it also ties in because at Christmas time, I used to gather around the fire with the family and watch the classics like Only Fools and Horses on the BBC. And it turns out there's a lot of horseplay happening with the BBC at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of us watched that show yesterday, Hunting the Rolex Rippers. And I've got to be honest with you, mate. Look, my initial impression when I watched it yesterday was it was produced very well. It was very professional, some great videography, what you'd expect from someone like the BBC. And I thought, look, I'm going to sleep on this before I open my big mouth and say what I want to say. And having slept on it, I just feel even more disappointed today than I did yesterday for a number of reasons.
Should we let the cat out of the bag and unfold what happened last night then?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously the BBC released this documentary. I'll put a link in the video description if anyone hasn't seen it. And it was, as I said, called Hunting the Rolex Rippers. The BBC went out and about speaking to alleged gang members, spotters on location in the areas where these robberies seem to take place. Went out with the Met and did all the bits and pieces that you'd expect. But I think there's a story that needs telling behind the scenes, how this program and documentary, if that's what you can call it, came about. I mean, I've got to be honest and say that having watched it now 3 times, I think the show really actually lacked credibility. And I'm going to call it a show rather than a documentary, because I felt that all it did in the end was probably frighten people rather than offer any real reasoning or discussing any potential solutions. And I was contacted by the show's presenter, the young lady that you saw presenting the show, Tia Dondi, back in the summer. And she told me that after doing their research that I was the person that everyone said that she should speak to, and would I help them produce the show, etc. Could I give them inside information, anything that I could give them, because basically at the time, as far as I'm aware, she told me that they had nothing really that they could start working with. And I told them, yes, I'd be more than happy to do that. There was no fee or finance involved. I didn't want any money or anything in return. I just wanted the story told properly. And I was really, really pleased. I was delighted, in fact, that finally someone from the mainstream media appeared to be wanting to tell this story and to get to grips with it. But that's not quite how it panned out.
No, I watched it. This was completely separate. I hadn't been in touch with you for a good couple of weeks, and it was actually my fiancé that saw on the BBC website this article, first of all, with a link to the TV show. And I read through it before me and Dave were recording an episode of the podcast yesterday, just to get some kind of idea of what the groundwork was. And as I'm reading it, I'm thinking, this is the kind of stuff Paul Thorpe says. This is the kind of stuff I say on my show all the time. We've had a couple of guys from the Met on a couple of times, Kev and his associates. Yeah. And it just read like a script or something. And then when I got home later on at night, I put the BBC episode on to watch it. And it just came across as staged and fake. And obviously the message is true. We know that inside and out. We know personal people that have been robbed at knife point, at gunpoint in London over the past couple of years. But it just was so disingenuous, it felt to me, that I sent you a WhatsApp and all it said was, is this fake?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the thing is, Ricky, what I find a little bit galling is, and I want to make something clear, first of all, one of my conditions, if you like, if that's the right word, of helping the BBC and Tia make this program was that they gave my channel some credit, you know, and pointed people in the direction of my channel because, you know, I was very explicit in what I do. And that's the reason they contacted me, because they knew that I was very hot on watch crime, that I was the one that was constant. And all I was looking for in return was some credit for the show. Now, I don't want people, or some credit for the channel, sorry. I don't want anyone to think that I've turned bitter because they didn't credit my channel. That's entirely inaccurate. In fact, I'm actually glad they didn't now, because the way it was eventually produced, I wouldn't really have wanted my name associated with the way they presented that, because I think it was, like you said, when I watched that show, it was virtually my words, word for word, coming from the mouths of the alleged gang members, coming from the mouth of the alleged spotter, even to the point where they interviewed one of the alleged gang members outside the exact restaurant where I told them that they were likely to be victims, and there had been victims in the past. This was virtually my script, word for word, but adapted to suit their narrative. And that's annoyed me somewhat, because they didn't do what I felt they were going to do, what they said they were going to do. They completely ignored. I mean, one of the big questions was, Ricky, sorry if I'm going on a rant here, but
No, not at all, man.
You know, I'm very passionate about this, as you know. One of their first questions to me was, where and why did this all start? And I said, wow, what a great question. Let me take you back to 2011, when I first wrote that article for the industry, which I go on about again and again and again, that the moment that Rolex took public access to the lost and stolen register away from the public and the pre-owned watch dealers, that watch crime would soar through the roof. And she said, wow, what a story. And this is the route that I felt we was going to go down. We was genuinely going to explore the reasons why. We was genuinely going to try and make moves to prevent watch crime, rather than produce something that for me was just fake. It just didn't work. Now, look, I'm sure we've all met a few people in our lives, Ricky, right? And there's one thing that I can guarantee you. Here's another problem that they faced and that I tried to help them with. They couldn't find one victim of watch crime that was willing to speak. They couldn't find one actual gang member or robber that was willing to speak. And they were struggling. They contacted me at least 3 or 4 times. Please, can you find us a victim? Please, can you find us a gang member? Please, can you find us this? And I said, look, I can find you a victim, potentially, but most of them don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Especially in public. They don't, they don't want to put their face on TV and say, look at me, I got robbed in the street, right? And I certainly won't be able to find you a gang member, because A, they won't speak to you, and B, I don't know any. I don't live in that world. I don't associate with street rats and villains. Okay, so the next thing we know, they've got I think it was one famous victim. I forget who it was now, but they had a guy.
Alec Jones.
That's it. They had Alec Jones. And then they not only did they find a gang member, they found a whole cast.
Yeah, they did.
Including a spotter, who and 2 or 3 of them were happy to reveal that they were carrying machetes. One of them was allegedly carrying a gun. I mean, this is bullshit of the highest order, Ricky. I'm sorry. And this is why ultimately that I'm glad that I wasn't eventually credited for helping make that. And there's just so much to go through. I mean, I've made a few notes. I mean, the whole thing from top to bottom really could be completely ripped apart. And I'm disappointed because here was an opportunity for the BBC to do something really good for us in the watch community, and they blew it big time.
I kind of get that. And anyone that had any kind of sense or had been involved watching your videos, listening to our podcasts, or just a good grip on reality when it comes to watches and being safe, the more the show went on, the more I felt it turned into a pantomime. It was more like an episode of a soap opera, and it lost the genuine feeling it had at the start that this was going to teach people how to be safe, how to protect themselves, and potentially ward people off getting involved in this. But it almost glamorized it at points, saying this is a great business to get into. This is how you can make $5,000 in an hour.
Yeah,
And that just didn't really tally.
Yeah, that didn't sit well with me at all. And by the way, again, they got all their pricing wrong. You know, the prices that these guys were stating. These guys, I've said it before lots of times, if they weren't thieves, they'd actually make decent watch dealers. They know the watches, they know the prices, they know the going rate, they know what they can sell them for. They know everything. They're very, very good at their job. And when you've got a guy trying to tell us that, you know, he's going to get maybe 500 quid or whatever for a stolen Rolex, again, that's just doesn't ring true. They went out with a Met again. They didn't have any. I found it hard to believe, but they didn't actually have any contacts within the Met that could get them out. Again, I was responsible for getting them into the Met and getting them out with those guys. But here's the thing as well. Another part that really got me, and where I'm watching this program and I'm thinking, wow, what is going on here, was when they introduced the alleged watch dealer, who was a woman, who claimed to have been a dealer for 15 or 20 years. Well, which one is it? I mean, it's a big difference between 15 and 20 years. But she then went on to virtually repeat my own words, but they got the context wrong. I was talking about the street rats and who they deal with and the stolen watch dealers, not the genuine pre-owned watch dealing market. And she come out with this statement that basically tarred the whole watch dealing world with the same brush. They got that wrong. They either didn't listen. I don't think they did it deliberately. They just didn't listen to what I said properly. When I said it's a very, very murky world out there, I was talking about the stolen watch market. I wasn't talking about the pre-owned watch market. But again, it was almost like they'd written down my words and got an actor to read them out.
I'll tell you what, that person you're speaking about there, when they came on, I still hadn't quite sussed what was going on with the full episode.
Yeah.
But when that person came out, you know when they make a documentary and it says it's based on true life events and they take maybe 5 or 6 characters and they meld them into the one?
Yeah.
The words that were coming out of this person, it was like listening to you, to me, to Dave, to Spencer, everybody all mixed together. Yeah. And it lost something in the cohesion, like you say. The words were there, but the sentiment was wrong.
Yeah.
And that's when it all started to crumble.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, I think the very important point that you've come up with there, Ricky, is the fact that I felt it glamorized it. I felt that there'd be people watching that show thinking there's a new career for me here. And that's not the message that we're trying to put out. There was another thing is that a couple of weeks back, Tia emailed me with a picture of a couple of watches. Could I identify them? Could I tell them what they were, etc.? And I said, look, it's difficult to tell you precisely. I know what they are. One was a Datejust, one was a Submariner, but it's difficult to tell. But I said that they do both look counterfeit to me. Lo and behold, one of those watches appeared on the show.
Oh,
so I'm wondering where those watches that appeared on the documentary actually came from, because to me, if it's the same watch that they sent me an email picture of, it was a fake watch, in my opinion. So were they using fakes as, basically as props?
Well, there was a part where the gentleman, one of the guys, had a watch and it had split, and he says, "All we need to do is put a pin back in it, but the bracelet's round the wrong way, and they don't make this one anymore, and it was worth 20 grand." And then he mispronounced Submariner instead of
Yeah,
Submariner,
yeah,
and I'm just like, "Oh my god, the wheels are
yeah,
coming right off this thing."
yeah, exactly. Again, these guys, and I don't think they give the public enough credit. I don't think they give the robbers enough credit in the respect that we're not stupid. And I think they badly underestimated certainly the watch community's intelligence here. Look, the people they portrayed as gangsters and robbers were credible to naive Middle Englanders because they fitted the exact criteria and demographic of what perhaps they expected to see.
Yeah.
But when they start talking about submariners, these guys are far more educated than that. They know the reference numbers of these watches. It is their job, Ricky. They are professionals. They're not opportunists. Most of these guys are organised and professional. The problem is that one of the problems I had with the BBC, and this is when it went cold with me, we spoke about demographics, and I revealed the extent of the problem we had with people coming to these shores illegally, groups from Somalia, organised crime gangs from Albania that were heavily involved in watch crime, and they didn't want to hear this. They really didn't want to hear it. They were really not interested in talking about that type of problem. It wasn't for the BBC. And from that moment on, they went a bit cold on me. And I think that's
So
the
the
moment.
truth didn't make a good story.
The truth didn't make a good story, and it didn't fit the BBC's narrative. They didn't, never once did they mention organised gangs from overseas. Never once did they mention that, we have a problem with these gangs that are coming to the UK, London in particular, to steal watches to order and then take them back to where they come from. None of this was acceptable to talk about. And when I mentioned this, I spoke about the Somalian strangulation gang that was doing the rounds last year. Thankfully, that particular crew have been caught and arrested by the boys at the flying squad. But I told them about their MO, their means of operation, and it wasn't politically correct enough for them. And I found that to be the moment when they went cold on me as their guider, if you like. And going back to the cast, I'm going to call them the cast because I feel that's what they were. I just felt that this had been put together as a drama show to create drama rather than to create education or to help the watch buying public or to help the industry as a whole. I spoke to them about Rolex, as I said earlier. They were very excited about that, not just Rolex and other watch manufacturers, to be fair, who could help this battle, this fight against watch crime, but they didn't want to go down that route, or they chose not to. Why they didn't? Well, you'd have to ask them at the BBC. Maybe it's because they don't want to argue with the big boys. But we've been battling with the big boys now for a number of years. And until the big boys are confronted and they are brought to book in the respect that they stand up, step up to the plate and say, we understand that for us to solve this industry-wide problem, we've got to step up to the plate and help you guys out and help ourselves out. But they weren't prepared to do that. And Ricky, you know what? It's not the first time. I've had Sky TV, I've had the BBC, I've had the Daily Mail, I've had the Telegraph, I've had numerous publications and radio shows that want to talk to me about this subject. But the moment you mention the R word, they go cold. Now, is that because they're frightened? Is it because they just feel that they're irreproachable, that they have nothing to answer for, or that the manufacturers really have no blame, or not blame perhaps is the right word, but no responsibility in trying to help us solve this issue? And And I guess I understand why. Look, when you talk about some of these big Swiss watch manufacturers, they are stellar brands. And when you're talking to a man from South London, you know, they might think, well, you know what, we're not gonna go down that route. Surely these brands don't have any part to play in this. They just sell watches. But we all know that's not the truth. We all know that there are ways that they can help. That there are ways that they can step up to the plate and help us. And we know that they're ignoring, all of the manufacturers virtually are ignoring that opportunity. Some of the smaller brands now, thankfully, are finally taking some responsibility. But the big boys still are really concentrating on two things: selling new watches and servicing old ones. And that's really all they're interested in.
No, it was a shame. It was a really missed opportunity all round. Thinking more about it, since we're talking now about the glamorization, dropping in cinematic sequences like a music video, using trap beats in the background,
Yeah.
showing off how much money they could made. And there was another thing that caught me that I just remembered there. The whole feeling that I got coming away from it was almost, it felt dirty to be a watch owner.
Yeah.
Because the message was, well, if you can afford a watch, you can afford to get ripped off. The guy will have another couple in the house.
I'm very glad you picked that up, Ricky, because that is something else that bothered me badly. It's a great point. The general perception is that if you've got this, you can afford to lose it. And that is so wrong. And that is such a dangerous message to be putting out there. I'm not saying that the BBC put that message out there, as in it didn't come from Tears Mouth, but it came from the guys that they interviewed, and frankly, I feel were coerced and rehearsed into saying what they were going to say. Now, I'm not saying that they didn't speak to any criminals. The power of the BBC and the term BBC can bring people out of their shell that wouldn't normally want to appear on camera. But I've never met a decent criminal yet that wants to put his face or half of his face on offer and tell the world what he does, where he does it, how he does it, and what he makes from doing it.
Yeah.
It just doesn't ring true. And the community that they had allegedly got into is particularly good at keeping themselves to themselves and keeping quiet. You know, this wasn't the local 50-year-old Patsy down the pub that had one too many, you know, spilling his guts. You know, these were allegedly organised criminal gang members who know full well that they're only a hair's breadth away from a 15-year jail sentence.
And the obfuscation of the faces was not obfuscated whatsoever. No. You could tell it was like ski masks that were open so wide that you could tell who they were. And if you knew them, you'd know who they were. And if the local plod knew who they were, you'd pick them out straight away.
And police know exactly who these people are as well. 9 times out of 10, these guys will already have a criminal record. At least 9 times out of 10, they'll already be on the books. So I'm sorry, you know, it's BS, you know, complete BS. Now, look, there's nothing wrong with using an actor, but I think you should say so.
Yeah.
You know, and especially from an organisation like the BBC, who, let's be honest, in recent years and in recent months, you know, have been losing credibility left, right and centre with the British public. And I think this kind of highlights the problem again. You know, half stories to suit a narrative and the hell with a real problem. And I was just really, really disappointed with it. Look, it was entertaining. It was like watching an episode of CSI or something. You know, it was, as a show, it was entertaining. But the final message and the perception that we were left with, I think, was dangerous. And I think the most dangerous perception that some people will have been left with is that this is an industry that I need to get into. And, you know, look, it was better than nothing, I suppose, in some ways, or was it? I don't know. I think that will be for other watch dealers to decide. I mean, I've had probably not quite half a dozen, maybe 4 or 5 on the phone this morning saying, did you see that crap last night? Yeah.
So what was the perception then within the industry and the community?
Yeah, the community, I've not so much delved into it yet. We'll see probably from the comments, etc. But certainly the 4 or 5 dealers that have rung me this morning all said the same thing. Yeah, what was that bullshit last night? You know, that's not done anyone any favours. You know, so, you know, very disappointing. I feel personally let down a little bit. I feel let down for my viewers in the respect that, look, you know, I spent a fair bit of time. I spent a whole day of my time ringing around victims, speaking to victims on behalf of the BBC. Some people might remember me putting out an Instagram post and a YouTube video saying, look, if you're a victim, the BBC want to speak to you. I had not a single reply. No one wanted to put their face up on the BBC and say, look at me, I got robbed.
Did they not even ask you? Because you're the most public person that talks about your own personal robbery experiences.
Actually, no. And I think one of the reasons is I was looking for members of the public, you know, ordinary. They wasn't particularly looking
not
for
dealers, ex-dealers.
Yeah, they wasn't looking for dealers. They were looking for street victims. This was more about street victims leaving a club, a pub late at night and being targeted and attacked. But again, the girl that they had on there that was an alleged spotter, I didn't believe her story either, that she stands at the bar flirting and drinking with the guys all night. No, they don't. They just spot. That's all they do. You don't need to drink with a guy and flirt with him all night to know that he's wearing a Patek Nautilus or a gold Submariner. They know. They're very, very good at their job. So again, I told them all about the spotters, how they work, where they work, and they recreated that and just did their own little bit of adaptation and just embellished it a little bit with the young lady.
A little bit?
A little
really?
bit, yeah,
I thought they embellished it a lot. They had a scene, for anybody that hasn't seen this, obviously go check it out after this concludes. But there was a segment in the show where they were out in a high street location, probably London, and they had like Halloween masks on, and they were all staged around watching people with watches. And I thought, this is going to draw the maximum amount of attention from the public and the authorities if this was legit and real. And that's where, again, I just looked at it and went, this is a pantomime.
Yeah, the guy leaning up against the wall, smoking a cigarette with an expensive watch on and all that, you know, just, you know, I'm sorry, you know, look, I'm sorry. I can only use the same word, disappointed. You know, I thought here is a real opportunity to get to grips with what's going on. One of my first words to the BBC when they approached me about this was, you can make a mind-blowing documentary that exposes what's really going on with watch crime, who's responsible, how it happens, how we can prevent it, how the manufacturers can prevent it. And they touched on none of it and went down the drama route that was frankly more suitable for an episode of EastEnders than it was as a documentary. But it is what it is, Ricky. It is what it is. There's not much we can do about it. This has always been the problem. Whenever the media approach us, and they approach me on a fairly regular basis, you tell them one thing, and when the report comes out, you get something entirely different. It's almost got to the point now where when I'm contacted by these people, I feel like saying to them, do you know what? I'm not really interested.
That's sometimes the best way. It's like other things I've been involved in the past. Modified cars, performance car tuning. Whenever we would do something with TV, radio, newspapers, magazines, unless it was specifically in the business of what we were doing, they would tar everybody with the same brush, totally highlight all the hyperbole, all the fake facts, and just dram up, just made it a huge drama just to get eyeballs and clicks. And unfortunately, that's the way this has gone.
Yeah, look, it works for them, and I understand why they do it. Unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily work for us, and it doesn't necessarily, you know, do the watch industry. And when I say the watch industry, I mean everyone, the community, the resellers, the ADs. It doesn't do any of us any. I can't imagine that any authorised dealers watched that last night and felt it's done them any favours.
Probably not the Omega boutique that somebody was pictured outside standing against either.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't done. I don't think it was produced sympathetically, put it that way, and it certainly wasn't done accurately. I mean, if they'd have had me and I'm glad they didn't. If they'd have had me on set, there's no way that I'd have wanted them picturing any one particular shop. You know, it's not good for that shop's business. And I was surprised actually that they parked up outside that famous restaurant in London that was on view, because that is exactly the restaurant where we feel that victims have been targeted before. And lo and behold, where did they end up parking? Right outside the location where I've been talking to them about. It was no coincidence, Ricky.
Well, there we go. That's a good synopsis of what we got to see on TV. Started out quite interesting. I thought this could be beneficial for everybody, and I think the takeaway is muted. It had its good points, but the fact that there was so much falseness about it, it just seemed contrived, put together, that just left a bitter taste in my mouth. And obviously messaging you last night, and you had exactly the same thoughts. I didn't know that behind the scenes you had been intrinsic in helping craft the narrative that then they put stooges and actors in front of. But there we go. But we're going to have to get you on to the Scottish Watches podcast again at some point, now that the digital vault's all sorted out and it's not coming soon.
Yeah, it's all going well, mate. Everything's going really well, better than we expected, to be fair. We're moving into phase 2 in the new year. This has all been a bit of a soft launch, really, up until the new year, and then we can really kick on. But I look forward to it, mate. You know, always love appearing with you guys. And, you know, wherever I go in the world, everyone knows Scottish Watches. So, yeah, lovely.
Glad to hear it. Perfect. You have a good Christmas.
And you, mate.